All right, so I'm going to call the Capital Planning Committee - School Research Subcommittee to order for Tuesday, November 16th, 2021, and it is 11:06 a.m. First action item is approval of meeting minutes from September 8th, and then we'll go to October 27th. So Kathy was the drafter of the 9/8 minutes. So I assume, Kathy, you have no comments on those. Katura, I don't know if you had any.
I did not. They looked good to me.
Okay, I had one typo, Kathy, which I can fix. You don't have to send me. Under absent, it says NON. I think we meant NONE. And then the only other thing I was going to do was to say that we took a roll call vote, given that we were virtual in each spot. Is everyone go with those changes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to move them in the same motion. So Cheryl had sent me the school committee meeting minutes for October 27th. I don't know if Kathy, you and Katura had a chance to read those. So do we want to hold on those for now?
I did not read them. I'm happy to approve them given who wrote them. Have they been approved by the school committee yet, Greg?
No, the next meeting, December.
Right. So I'm happy to approve them. What do you want to do, Katura?
Yeah, I read them and they looked good to me. And
Okay, if you've read them, then let's just approve them. If you guys have read them, let's approve them.
Yeah, I'm good with them. So I will make a motion that we approve the September 8th, 2021 meeting minutes with the edits discussed in the October 27th, 2021 meeting minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. Cook,
Aye.
Martin,
Aye.
and Malinowski's aye. So that's unanimous. Next item is the superintendent's update related to the MSBA Statement of Interest, Neary School.
Sure. So this should be a quick update. We did reach out to MSBA to see where they were in terms of the statement of interest. It is still in process. I think the next meeting date is December 15th. So we are still in the running at this point in time, and we've received no communication thus far. I have Cheryl continually. Cheryl Lepre is calling MSB every once in a while just to check in to see where they are, but no new communication at this point.
When you say no new communication, that means since their visit to the school in late October, correct?
Correct. That is accurate.
And what's the date what's their next meeting date? 12/15?
Correct. December 15th, or it was a March meeting date, depending on where they were taking up where their team was taking up statement of interests.
And Greg, I know you've done this before, but can you, and do quickly, just reiterate the process from this point on?
Yeah, so this is we submitted the statement of interest. The senior study team came out to visit, and now they're reviewing it and then basically determining who they're going to invite in for the next phase of the process. And that next phase of the process, if we are invited, is a 270-day period of time where we have to do the feasibility, schematic design, and so forth. And then from that point, they then take another vote to invite us into an actual project that they'll fund.
Okay, and they told you there are 11 schools in the running at this point. Is that what you said at the school committee meeting?
That is accurate.
Okay, and then what if they invite us in to the process so that we then start on the design, schematics, etc. Who funds that completely?
That would be, I think, warrant article.
Okay, so in other words, the town funds that. They don't fund that. We have to fund that completely.
Correct.
Okay, and we don't get reimbursed for that. That really is our nickel.
There may be some reimbursement on the back end if we advance into construction, is I think how it works, Kathy, but I think we're going to be on the hook for a good chunk of that if that's where we go.
Okay, so we know we have to provide the money up front to get that done.
Correct.
And it's not a small dollar amount, just full disclosure.
Okay, so let's be optimistic for a moment. Let's assume, let's just say that they meet in December and they invite us in. Does that mean then at the March regular town meeting, assuming it's in March, and we don't know that for sure yet, but if it is, it's the earliest it's going to be. This is where we want to have, if we decide we want to go forward, we can still decide, right? We don't, we still got, we think we should go forward. That would be we would have the time, we think, to actually get that on the annual town meeting warrant for March.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question for this group, but also the school committee to have a placeholder for that potential scenario, Kathy.
And of course, you'd have to have bids at that point to actually present. You'd have to have numbers and proposals, et cetera, by then. So you'd have to work pretty fast. Okay, then if they don't come back till March, obviously that probably won't be on the March warrant, right? It'd have to be either a special or wait a full year.
That is accurate.
Okay, all right.
So hopefully, I like your optimism. I like living in that world of being optimistic. So when we did reach out, it was great to hear that it's still in process and no doors have been closed at this point in time.
Well, 11 just doesn't sound like a lot of schools to me. That's why I'm a little bit optimistic. It's not 40. So 11 doesn't sound like a whole lot of schools.
I think there's over
And how
60
many-
submissions, right?
Out of 60. And do we know how many they generally invite in at a time? Or, I mean, I'm sure it depends on scope of project, but.
I think they have a dollar amount, a budget, which they work with Katura, and depending on the projects they approve, I think that depends on the number of projects that move forward.
Okay. And do we also know what the chances are that this would be decided at the December meeting versus the March meeting, or if that's just a complete?
No,
Open.
unfortunately,
Okay.
I have a feeling, we don't know with certainty. I have a feeling it will be decided. I have a feeling if we're going to hear, we'll hear before the end of December.
Okay. Because I mean, the March timing would be very awkward, right? I mean, that would be kind of tough because then we have to, it's just a whole different set of complexities.
Yeah, it slows things down a bit.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the other thing to just factor in there, right, is if we don't hear in December, right, then I think there can be a discussion of whether we want to advance something and just have it there anyways. Because I think at that point, I think the right due diligence, if that's where the school committee wants to go in terms of investigating a new facility, is I think we need to have a professional look at, what are we talking? And is waiting for MSBA, right, given that there's no assurances, the right answer for the town to achieve the objectives that especially the schools are looking for with Neary, but obviously the broader discussion that we're all trying to have as well.
That's a good point, Jason. I agree.
Okay. So along those lines, kind of transitioning to the next agenda topic, which was my update on the town space needs study. I think at the last meeting, I had articulated that each of the departments had been surveyed in terms of what their required needs were going to be. But we had held short of doing anything with that in terms of floor plans in any building because we just candidly didn't want to start marking up potentially a school before obviously Greg had made his presentation to the school committee and we didn't know where MSBA was. But before, like, it was all that same week, if I remember, if my weeks are jiving together, Greg, when we had the discussion with MSBA, they had a significant number of questions related to consolidation. And it became abundantly clear that we were going to need to present a plan of how Woodward, if that was actually closed, how that would be used for the community for the better good. So after that meeting, Greg did give permission for the town's designer to at least start that process of what would it take in validating that actually could be used for all these things that people have kind of out there, if that was one of the directions given, it was one of the scenarios. So That is in process. There's been no presentations made, but I think we're now getting to a point where we'll know how feasible it is to even repurpose the building, right? It's all been theoretical at this point. But, if we were going to really invest in a new Neary, and based on Greg's at least preliminary recommendation, which no one has voted on, that, if you had a new facility, you could consider consolidations for all the reasons that have been discussed. How would we repurpose it? MSBA had a lot of follow-up questions on that. Like, Greg, I was candidly very surprised that
Yes.
that's where most of the questions were.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so now go slow, Jason. So you went to that meeting.
I did and Roger was the school committee representative.
Okay, so I'm surprised to hear this. They were actually questioning and curious about what we would do with Woodward if Woodward's closed. They thought that was within their realm of understanding.
Yeah, in Keith and
In other
Greg
words, it
were
was
both.
relevant to their decision.
Yeah, I mean,
Good, Greg.
no, I think that from a standpoint of they did make an investment, or the community made an investment in Woodward School. It's a modern building. I think they wanted to know that the town was serious in kind of its plans and its thinking, and wanted to know that the plan for potentially decommissioning Woodward was in motion, and that there was community support around it. Therefore, wanted to know how serious it was. And I think that's where Jason spoke about, a lot of work had been done, and now it was getting, pen to paper in terms of what it could be used for.
And it's what they're really saying is, we're not interested in providing money to rehab Neary if you're just going to mothball a good school. Is that what they're really saying?
No, community support is the key words that Greg said. They want to get behind projects that they think have a good likelihood of passing and getting the support of the broader community. So if we were going to decommission a school and just sell it to a third party, I imagine we would have gotten a thanks but no thanks letter already. But I think what they're looking to say is, okay, clearly your school population is going to be very engaged in these conversations, but because we've brought in the concept of a broader plan for the community and hopefully effectively reusing a building, if that was a path that was chosen, they actually asked the timeline, Kathy, of when we could actually present that back to them. That was one of the follow-up questions that Greg got in writing after the meeting. So I mean, I was surprised, but I think it was all about community support and ability to fund these projects, right? They wanted to make sure that their school project, if they were to sponsor it, was not going to go up against, obviously we don't need a new public safety building. We do need a new library. If you speak to the library board of trustees, they wanted to make sure that they weren't going to put all this funding and prep work and specialists into something that there's no way the town could actually fund and bring together as a broader plan.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
they
they're
don't-
very interested in the whole package, not just the Neary piece of it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Jason's point around they want to approve statements of interest where they think there's a high likelihood of it being approved by town meeting members from point A to point Z. I don't think they have any interest in getting us to the entry level, going through a statement of interest process in the 270 days, only to find out that there's no appetite for any type of building project, and therefore that they can't expend the money. That's money that they have sitting, potentially invested in community that can't be accessed by other communities.
So to be clear, are they saying they want a whole lot more details and information about if that's a decision to be made to close Woodward, repurposing that building before they will even go any further?
No, I got the sense they just wanted to know it was in motion, and it wasn't just something that, someone had come up with this great idea, that there was actually some thought, clearly financial resources, but also even more importantly, public discussion. I really said, look, we've had all these public meetings, right? This subcommittee, school committee, capital planning committee. This is not a discussion that has been happening behind closed doors. It's out there. We had that letter we did a couple months ago. So that was what generated, I think, the line of questioning.
Are they looking for any sort of further information or presentation from us on Woodward?
Not
What
yet.
happened with Woodward? Okay. But we're
No,
just going to move forward and look at it in a more detailed way so that we're ready for that.
I think that
Right.
part of the, so we had two meetings. The first one was virtual. I think one of the things we did well was we had all the right stakeholders at that virtual meeting to demonstrate there is community. There is a partnership with the town and the school department, capital planning, school committee. So I think that was positive. And I think they wanted to know that it wasn't just the school committee or the school district or just the town pushing this forward.
And the only person from the town side at that meeting was Jason?
Yeah, Mark and Brian were invited, but weren't able to attend.
Okay, so do we think that they are waiting for anything else between now and the time they meet from us on that aspect that they've got enough, they're satisfied that enough is going on to go ahead and make their decision?
Yeah, they had one follow-up question, which we answered. And I think other than that, we're in the process of, we don't need to provide any more information at this point in time.
Do we answer the question? Was it in writing or was it a phone call?
Writing.
Okay.
And it was all about the timeline of when we could produce something,
I
which we
see.
committed to this month.
But they don't need it.
They said they acknowledged the receipt and said, thank you for the prompt follow-up, I believe was the
Okay.
general email back. So
Okay, I think that's why I was confused if we were
Yeah.
sending something additional to them or whatever, but
no,
okay.
I just think we need to be ready if they do ask for it to be able to get on a Zoom or whatever they want to do. If it's going to be important to their decision one way or another.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to move on to review of updated demographic study in various scenarios. So I have not sent anything new across since the meeting, but I figured I'd start and give kind of a update on some conversations I had with Bob, the demographer, based on the questions I had asked in the joint meeting. And then I know Greg has separately had his own conversations with Bob on the back end of those to figure out where Greg wants to go in terms of finalizing that. But, I think if you all think back to the questions I was asking, it was mainly around that K-1 progression ratio for this year, like from this year to next year. And what I found out by looking back at some of the details, and it became apparent that there were some different formulas he was using at different points in time. And I think we had gotten a few versions, Greg. Bob basically has revised or planning to revise his numbers to really follow our historic ratios from K-1, as opposed to going from birth to 1, which is what he was doing in the numbers that were presented to us at that meeting, which certainly will swing the numbers. But there's also other factors that he's playing into this that no matter how he cuts it, he seems to be coming back to roughly the same number of total students 10 years from now, or I guess it's in 2030-ish, regardless of how he's cutting, because of how he's looking at the birth data.
Can we actually pull it up and look at it while we're talking? Because I've got mine, but I want to go to the page that we're talking about as far as where the jump didn't seem to make sense.
I don't know if anyone has it readily accessible. I can try to
I
find
do.
it.
I've got it up. I've got it up.
Jason, you want to give me permission to share my screen?
You should have it.
Okay, so Jason, you expressed your concern about that jump, right? And he went back and looked at it and he is making changes, but you're saying the ultimate conclusion is not going to be much different as far as where we end up in 2030?
Yes, which still, I guess, caused me to scratch my head a little bit, because I would have thought that there just would have been a decrease a little bit, right? I don't know if it would have changed any of Greg's scenario planning that he then used this data to present. But then when he did it, he started to move around some of the births again, that they weren't tied. So I'm going to need Greg to speak to that, because I still don't understand that, or if I don't know, there was a conversation that I wasn't part of. But if you kind of look here, I think this is the revised version that Greg has on the screen now.
It is
showing
definitely
that-
revised because that was not 123 with what
Yeah.
we looked at. I know that. for
That
a
was
fact.
148,
Yeah.
I believe.
Can that
But
be
if you
made a
look-
little bigger? Can you enlarge that a tiny bit?
Yep.
Please.
But if you look to the far right, Kathy, on what Greg has up here, your total number is 1253 in the fall of 2030, which
Yeah.
is, I'll call it rounding compared to where Bob was in that presentation, because at least from what I can tell, he then changed the births up at the top. And they don't necessarily, these are all projections, right? Because some of these kids have not even been born in some of the later years yet, so we don't know for sure. But it's also a matter of there is no, we all saw the data. There's no rhyme or reason to how the trends work from the date of birth to how they actually enroll in kindergarten. Sometimes it could be as much as twice as many kids that were born in the town 5 or 6 years before that enroll. Sometimes it's almost like spot on to the number of kids. Obviously, there's transient sort of populations too. So I think the first thing I just want to make sure everyone was aware of is Bob did agree that using the historical K-1 progression ratio made a lot of sense because it's consistent, as opposed to birth to first grade was very inconsistent.
No, I think with any projection, the closer you are to the data, the more accurate you are. So I think I agree with that change. I think going from 117 to 148, again, was not historically what we've seen in the district, nor is it what we're projecting as a district for an increase in the current K class to first grade for next year.
Okay, but let's stick on that for a moment because it was such a obvious thing. Again, what's his explanation of why he did that to begin with?
He Jason, and you can add to my thinking. So he used total fertility rate and crude migration rate as the methodology for calculating enrollment trends. So that was the strategy. Those were the formulas applied, and that's where he got the 148. So he didn't really look at progression from grade to grade, from year to year. He used his total fertility rate and birth rates, and he also used crude migration.
Okay, but fertility and birth rates would not explain going from 117 to 148. Crude migration, I guess, would. People moved in. I mean, what else could it be? So at this point, are you two satisfied that he's done what he needs to do? And this is, we've got to rely on one or the other, right? So is this what we're now going to rely on?
I'm satisfied for this K-1 question that this seems like the more appropriate answer looking back 15 to 20 years in how this town operates. Looking at the birth data to grade 1 just never really made a lot of sense to me, especially when you look at historical fact patterns in the town. I think we have enough of a sample that this appears to be the right answer to me, but Greg, I'd welcome your thoughts.
No, I think it does. Again, I think when we look at our NESDEC projections, and I know Jerry Capra spent a lot of time on analyzing these, and I think his I always recall his statement was, obviously if you're looking at a year or 2 or 3 years out, it's much more accurate than if you're looking at 10 years out. And when you're looking at 10 years out, there's a lot of variability that can come into play. So your projections are just that, projections. I'm more comfortable with RLS and having conversations with NESDEC and the person who did the NESDEC projections, and with Bob. Bob can actually talk about the methodology that he used, and it is consistent throughout his enrollment projections. And therefore, I think I'm more comfortable with RLS will I sit here and say that in 2030, this is what it's going to look like? Like, no. But I also think it also provides some flexibility. It provides a little bit of a cushion for, plus or minus enrollment.
Okay, so I totally agree. I mean, it's a fact, the further out, the less reliable others. So we know that. So that's a given. Okay, so Keith and Greg, the 1157 that you see in cell J16, as far as enrollment for the fall of 2021 for K through 8, right there. Is that correct?
Hang on. This is the problem when you deal with 3 districts.
No, I understand. You should have these memorized.
Hang on one sec. I don't have them memorized, but I know where to find them quickly.
I'm just joking.
Actually, can hang on.
So I'll take, you want to stop sharing your screen so you can.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So Kathy, while he looks at that, the other thing I just want everyone to start to think about is we're then going to go into the birth data, right? Which again is somewhat of a wild card, right? Because we know certain things, we don't know other things, right? We don't know what's going to happen even the next 2 months, right, of the year. So, part of the question I'm going to posture to everyone here is, I 100% agree with Greg's thoughts that RLS definitely has I'll call it a method that they can explain to us, and that would be the I'll call it chosen provider that I would recommend that we bring forward. But I think the more fundamental question is based on the recommendation that Greg made, even if we were off 100 either way, right? Like, I know we spent a lot of time talking about the pending litigation. I know we've talked about like what else could happen in this town. I'm not sure it impacts the direction that at least Greg has tentatively recommended. I know there's been no votes taken on it, et cetera, but unless we back away from a building project, I'm not sure whether we go plus or minus 100, whether it matters. It may matter to exactly how many square feet you do when you go into a design phase, but I'm not sure it matters into some of the scenarios that we'll talk about again that Greg had presented to the school committee. So just going to put that out there as kind of where I want to go once we resolve like whether we have the right enrollment even for this year.
So our enrollment number is 1148 currently. NESDEC was projecting 1176, and Bob's was 1157.
And now why would Bob not have had the exact numbers?
I'd have to look when we gave him the number. That might have been the, I'd have to look.
Okay, so it might be when you gave it to him. I would say that when he finalizes this, and let's talk about how to get it finalized, that he should use 1148 so that when someone questions us down the road, we've got every fact that we could possibly have had in this report, and they don't start with, well, you were wrong to begin with. I mean, it's 9 students, but still 9 students, right? So I'd say we want him to put 1148 in there as far as where we are today, because we can. We know that's a number.
It should be the enrollment as of the date of the report, because I imagine your enrollment changes every week potentially, Craig, or every month, right? I know it's single digits, but people leave, people come.
Well, okay, so pick a date. Since you kind of do a lot of things on October 1st, right, Greg, as far as enrollment, pick a date and just say, and put it on there. This is make sure it's clear on October 1st or November 1st, this is what the enrollment was, and just put that in there as a fact so that people know this is our starting point. Okay, now I know I'm being a little bit pain. Can you put that one slide back up that showed his numbers? I want to see where he ended up. I didn't write it down, the 1200. Okay, so can you go over, can you move it over a little bit to the left? There you go. Okay, so 1253 is his new number.
Correct.
Okay, now, is he going to take that and do what he did on the previous report we saw at the joint meeting where he put the cushion in and added a 10%? Okay, there you go. Okay, so 1253 to 1337, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So my question to the group is this what we're now going to rely on here to going forward? This is what we're going to rely on because we seem to all think that he gave us more confidence than NASDAQ did as far as this work goes. And it's much more conservative than NASDAQ. NASDAQ showed a pretty significant decline. This does not. So that we've got a much more conservative report to use here.
I'd be in favor of that. I see no reason to deviate from this. That I have two fundamental kind of questions still. Is one on the births that I don't know if we want to even go down the road because, like I just said, what is a movement in 50 going to really do to anything we go and do? Like, I could probably sit here and nitpick some more, but I'm not sure what it would do or change any of the conclusions. But I am comfortable that if we have a presentation to town meeting of why we need to do something and why this makes sense, these would be the numbers that I would at least start with or have a story behind the rationale to kind of maybe cut out some of the noise of what if Park Central, what if this, what if that, but also the point that I think I've made before is remembering that we have, at least with Finn, Trotter, and Neary, flat parcels for the most part, maybe a little less Trotter, but flat parcels that are ripe for addition if you were dead wrong down the road. I don't want that to ever be the case, right? But like, I think it's a low risk scenario being dead wrong here. I just think you'll have an opportunity in the future to fix it if something happens in this town that no one's aware of right now. So that's my long-winded answer, Kathy, of saying, yes, I'm comfortable with using RLS. I see no reason to deviate from it. The question is whether we want to refine it anymore to avoid maybe some basic questions and really work on the substance.
And I think we need to decide that this morning. If we're going to continue and go forward, which we need to now, it's time now to put the pedal to the metal.
So hang on, can I just ask Katura's opinion on that? So Katura, are you in line with that or you have a different opinion?
Yeah, so I guess I would say this, I am comfortable with RLS plus the cushion. I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, when you think about where we started these conversations a few months ago, we were looking at a report that showed a steady decline in enrollment and then projecting a decline into the future. And that just didn't make sense to me, just on an intuitive level. And I do feel comfortable with the RLS report from the way he approached it. I like his methodology. I like the progression ratio idea, which was totally missing in the first report that we got. And so I feel much more comfortable with his analysis process. And I feel comfortable with building in the cushion that has been built in so far. I like the idea that you just mentioned, Jason, of kind of having in the back of our minds where if we're completely off, there's sort of a fallback scenario. Because I mean, Park Central, we keep saying this in sort of like 100 student cushion or whatever. It's 338 residential units. So I mean that's huge if it happens, and I don't think that would only represent 100 students. I just don't think that makes sense if you think about it. They're townhomes. It would be over 150 market rate townhouses. I mean, realistically, that's going to be a lot of families and it's going to bring a lot of kids. So I'm not saying we need to plan for that and build it in at this particular point in time, but having, a reasonable cushion like we're talking about and using the RLS report, I'd be fine with drilling down a little bit more into numbers in case we get questions. I personally thought it looked pretty good. We can probably kind of find some more things to details or something, but I don't have any questions at this particular point in time. You might. So that's kind of my roundabout way of saying I feel good about all that.
So Couture, if it gives you any comfort, I actually got on the phone with the Park Central developer and we went through how we came up with 100. We actually looked at Madison Place, which also has townhomes and apartments. And we looked at the kids that Madison Place added to K-8. We knew it was 17 at that point, just so you know. I don't know if 40 it is today, but it was 17, a year and a half ago when I did this. So we actually wasn't a number made up. We actually went through it, and that's why we came up with 100. So by doing the 10% increase in the TFR and the CMR, new acronyms for us, that I think allows for Park Central. Park Central, if it's 100, is less than 10% of what we're looking at right here. So I think we've got that cushion built in for Park Central, unless we're just really wrong with what ends up being in Park Central if it goes through as currently planned. But I'm just trying today to say, I really think we've got to put a stake in the ground here as far as what we're going to assume is the school population 2030, so we can move forward. And I want to remind you, I think what Greg said to us at the school committee meeting is that based on the RLS results, that no matter what, if we close a school, we have to expand one of the remaining schools to accommodate doing this. So we're already talking from day one about expanding a school. Maybe we need to make sure we can show people we can expand it further if we have to, but there's already, I think we're already there as far as having to expand a school if we use these numbers. And Greg, tell me if I'm wrong with what I just said, but I thought that's what you were telling us.
If we close Woodward, yes.
And of course, we don't think Woodward can be expanded. While we've been talking today, I've been making a list of things that we know for sure that I think should be our premises of what we're relying on and what we don't know. And one of mine was, we don't think we can expand Woodward. So Woodward doesn't seem to be expandable in any significant way. So therefore, if we need an expanded school to close a school, then Woodward really may be off the table as far as being the choice of staying open.
I think I'll just add to that too, Kathy, that going back to Jason's point around, plus or minus 50 students, if you really look at the programmatic design that we're trying to achieve in terms of lessening transitions for students, having teachers be able to collaborate and maximizing our, people, time, instructional resources and materials, this would be our recommendation. It is our recommendation based on those factors. Obviously not taking into consideration, money, taxpayer dollars, all those other factors that come into play. But from a programmatic perspective, this is what I would recommend. This is what I am recommending to the school committee as something that I think makes educationally sound practice moving forward for the school system if we're going to make a change.
So Greg, I've also got a list of what I call the fuzzy stuff that's important, and that's one of those: less transitions, more of a campus atmosphere, possibly savings on bus routes, et cetera, because they're all right there. So we've got all those too, which I think are really important to parents to bring up. But if we know we can't expand Woodward, we know that Neary has to stay open. And therefore we know we've got to spend money on Neary. It's just a fact. We may not close a school, but you're still going to spend money on Neary. Neary has got to be rehabbed. It's too old not to address. We can do it a little bit at a time, or we can just say, bite the bullet, and we really need to get the school ready for the next 30 years, one way or the other.
So in an effort to finalize the report, right? Because I think we need to get a formal final report, no draft stamp from Bob. Greg, I hate to do this to you. Can you just bring up the screen one more time? I just want to because I think I have a potential recommendation that if the committee's comfortable with, we can then take a motion on. So
Jason, can I also interrupt just briefly? Too, I want to make sure that, because I've been dealing with all the draft iterations of tables, I want to make sure what I want to do is make sure I'm going to reach back out to Bob and say, finalize your report, put all the appropriate tables in, whatever numbers we're going to change. So then I can then update the space needs analysis in the tables that I have and add scenarios to present to this committee as a final version.
Perfect. Makes a lot of sense.
So one question too to ask, why is the bottom right not much different than the top right, given the bottom right has a 10% increase in both the TFR and the CMR, and the top right is only TFR? I mean, they're basically the same numbers. So can you just make sure he's got a good explanation for that too? He probably does, but
Are you talking about the 110, Kathy?
I'm talking about the two on the right, where you've got the 10% increase in the TFR on the top right there. Yep. And then the bottom, you've got 10% increase in both TFR and CMR, and they're basically the same numbers.
Because
So
those
doesn't
kids are already
apply.
in the kids are already in the school system. We already know it's a fact. So basically, your fertility rates and your births aren't going to impact grade 8 in 2030, if I'm reading this correctly. Is
Well,
what
you've
he's
got
saying.
TFR on both of those. And so the CMR, which is the migration rate, looks like it hasn't affected it all, Jason, on the bottom right. The same numbers, top and bottom.
Because basically, I think what we're saying is, even though people move into town, people also leave the schools. So the historic ratios from a grade progression show that there's not much movement once you solidify your number after grade 1. Is I think
Okay,
what
so
this
you're
is
just
saying.
saying there's not much net migration end is what he's saying, I guess. And that's what you're saying.
The deltas in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, if you look at this, and then it tails off because I don't know, I can't even figure out which grade these kids are in now, but whoever's grade 8 in the fall of 2030, those kids are already in the Southborough public schools.
The way I think he explained it too is that the progression methodology picks up some of the migration. And therefore, when he applied the migration rate, it didn't really have an impact on the overall total population in 2030.
Okay, but all I'm saying is that on the right-hand side, the two where he's building the cushion in, right?
Yep.
There's no difference between the top and the bottom. TFR is in both of them. CMR is in the bottom one only, and it hasn't made a difference. So what I think he's saying, and correct me if you guys disagree, is that the net migration is still pretty much zero there, and therefore if you increase it by 10%, it's still zero. So in other words, the migration is not affecting, the 10% increase in migration doesn't affect those because he's saying there is no net migration. People are moving in and out as fast as each other. So I would have thought that it would have gone up a little bit more at the bottom right, but it's not.
Yeah, I think it stops at grade 5 or 6.
Yeah.
So Greg, can you go back to the enrollment tab, the baseline? So actually the cell you have highlighted, and I don't know if we're gonna call that pink or whatever, that's 2020 births. So I just wanted to raise this to the committee. He's using 89 total births in 2020. So I went to Jim Hegarty and I said, how many total births were there in 2020? And he said there was only 76 in Southborough, which is not only a figure he has, but he gets directly from the state. And the reason I even thought to do that was because Bob changed that number between the version we saw at the school committee meeting in this version that Greg has on the screen. So I guess my recommendation when Greg goes back to Bob to finalize this is, unless Bob has some demographer specific reason to use the 89, I would propose we actually use the actual 2020 births that Jim had provided, which is a state provided number. And then obviously his formulas will work from there of birth to K ratios. I just think it would make a lot of sense.
What's Jim's number, Jason?
76 for 2020.
See, I think that's a pretty big difference. Okay,
Yeah,
so you're
so-
saying that they're born in 20, they'll be in school in fall of 2026.
Yes.
Okay.
So I think, I don't know if that does anything to what we see on the screen or not, but I just think presentationally we should show it that way. Because they wouldn't be in the school, but yeah, or they go to the school in 2026. So it's like, I guess it's 5
Well,
years. It'd be
it's a known number, so we should use it.
Yeah. Yeah. So
we're not trying to project something that we already know.
But where did Bob get his number? Do we know that?
he used a ratio. He used his fertility ratios.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
I just think I'm okay using fertility ratios for years we don't know about. But now let me give you the more interesting point. So I guess for Greg's clarification, does anyone have an objection to using the actual number for 2020?
No, I think we
No.
should do that every time we can.
Okay.
Yeah. Are the
All right.
other numbers actual also?
Yes,
The number before that?
I went to
Okay.
the state website and
Okay.
just made sure it was off by 1 in certain years, but it came out the same number, so I didn't bother. So then Here's the interesting part. Through November 3rd, which was the date I talked to Jim, there's already been 83 births in 2021 in the town of Southborough.
Wow.
So obviously we'll continue to monitor that. And obviously there's probably a little bit of a lag if I think back to the whole birth certificate process, et cetera. But I didn't do 83 times a factor of 10 over 12, but he may adjust his 94 based on that fact. I don't know. It's pretty darn close though, is I guess what I'm saying.
It is close. It is
Yeah.
close. You actually
Yeah.
get 95, I believe, when you do that. So it is
Yeah.
close.
So that gives me, that's what gave me comfort, like to Greg's point of RLS. So that was my minor point that I think I just want everyone to have all the facts, but I think we're at a point where we can give Greg direction to go back to RLS and finalize this and memorialize it for, I guess, the next item on our agenda.
97, Jason.
Okay. So
That's interesting how much variability there is year to year in births.
Yeah.
yeah, like go back and look at like 2016.
Yeah.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Versus 2012.
Yeah.
People were bored. We'll go no
Wonder
further.
if we looked at how the economy was doing, we could.
Well, we also had a pandemic with people. A lot of people, they couldn't
Oh.
go anyplace.
All right, so I will reach out to Bob. I mean, I completely agree that the known numbers that we have should be reflected in the data set Bob is using.
Can we, for purpose of the minutes, be very explicit about what you're going to ask? You're going to ask him to change 05 to 76, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And are we asking him to change anything else specifically, Jason?
No, I think we're supporting the use of the grade progression ratio from K to 1 as opposed to using the birth to grade 1 ratio. So basically supporting the numbers that are in front of us.
Okay. And then as far as the fall of 2021, just ask him where he got the number and put it in the report so we know where he got it. So if someone comes back and says, no, it was really 1148. We said, no, on this day it was really 1157. So just
Okay.
make sure we know where 1148 or 1157 comes from. Did you change it already? No. Well, wait a minute. Okay.
I just
now-
highlighted it in yellow for my own.
Oh, there it is, 1157. Okay.
So I'm going to make a motion to that this committee support the use of the RLS demography study with the edit to the 2020 birth that was discussed in this meeting in validation or verification of the fall 2021 enrollment, in support that the superintendent work with RLS to finalize this report for the baseline of any future conversations.
Jason, can we tie that in somehow to the school committee approve, kind of moving along the same lines? I feel a little uncomfortable voting on something where it has, I mean, we had that whole presentation, but the school committee has not taken a position on any of this.
I guess. So let's have
Our
a second.
job is to recommend to the school committee. So I think
Yeah.
we should go forward with this. We've got to finish our report. to the
So
school
hang on, let's just have someone
Well, I
second
didn't hear that
for
it
this-
was a recommendation to the school committee, so that would be different.
So let's just have a second, just so we can properly discuss. I think both are valid points.
Second.
Okay. All right, so second for discussion. So, Katura, I completely agree with your comment. Obviously, the school committee needs to vote on all of this, right? Like, and you are the elected body that really, right? Candidly, right? I know you respect what Greg says, but you could disagree with what Greg says. You could disagree with what Kathy and I say. So, the purpose of my motion was mainly to advance everything to a final stage so that we could bring one package to a future school committee meeting and say, this is what we did on the side. This is what Greg did. Here's our proposed path forward. And oh yeah, by the way, here's all the other stuff happening in the town that we're going to tie in. So I don't think this is a binding vote, because it can't be, because we're a subcommittee. We're not a formal committee. It's just really providing direction, but I'm happy to clarify subject to future school committee action in my motion, if that would make you more comfortable.
Okay, can you just articulate your motion again so I can hear it again with all of that as background?
All right, I'm going to withdraw my motion, just because I'm not going to be able to repeat exactly verbatim what I had originally said. So I'm going to move that for purposes of a recommendation to the Southborough School Committee, that we work with that we have the superintendent work with RLS Demography to finalize the demography report that is on the screen, subject to verification of the fall 2021 enrollment in a change of the actual births to 76 for 2020.
Okay, I can get behind that.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, second by Kathy. Any further discussion?
No.
All right, roll call. Kathy,
Aye.
Katura,
Aye.
and I am aye. So that is unanimous. So Greg, do you feel like you have all that? Okay.
This is
So-
the shortest and simplest motion ever.
Yeah, but it's very important. We've got to
It is.
We've got to go
Yeah,
forward.
yeah, no, it's true.
Okay. So now that we have semifinal numbers, obviously, Greg, I don't want to speak for you, but this isn't going to change anything macro in it may refine a few of the shades of the colors of your boxes, right? But I was prepared coming into this meeting, hearing especially what you, Gary, Stephanie, and Keith talked about the Trottier impact. Like, I don't even know why that's a scenario anymore. Like,
Right.
I get you had to consider it, but it just makes no sense to me. Katura, you're the school committee member, but I'm just on the outside looking in.
Yeah.
I would either motion or just recommend that we abandon that scenario. How is anyone going to get behind presenting that? Even if it made sense from a numbers perspective, we heard a lot of educational reasons why it's contrary to everything you're trying to achieve. So while I applaud you for trying to consider it and being open-minded, I just don't see any reason to spend any time on that chart moving forward.
I would agree with that because I think it made sense to take an initial look at it just to make sure that, we're not missing something. But I totally agree that it just sounded like it wouldn't make sense under any in these circumstances at all. So.
Kathy?
I totally agree. And I think we should go further and detail before we leave today what the scenarios we think are realistic.
Okay. So hold off on a motion on Trottier then, but I will motion that at some point, to just given that we're on board with that.
And I wrote that, that's one of my things we know. I said, we know that it's not conducive to move 5 to 8 because of the impact on the 5th graders to be with kids that are so much more mature and advanced. So that's one of my things I wrote down.
Okay. I mean, given where we're at on the demography numbers, I mean, I welcome other thoughts, but don't we only really have one scenario at this point?
I think so.
So do we want to, I mean, the scenario, right, just to make sure everyone's clear, because actually I probably should have said this, that I got a lot of calls after that school committee meeting, mainly from the other groups that are very interested in what may happen, that candidly maybe don't care as much about the schools anymore. They either their kids aren't in the schools or they've moved beyond the schools, and they didn't understand the recommendation at all. I'm not saying that it wasn't clear. I'm just saying that they didn't follow the meeting, and I get there was a lot of numbers, and if you're not numerically inclined, it's very easy to lose. People think that, at least the genesis of people are like, all right, so you spent all this time doing all this work, but there's going to be no consolidation, so why do we spend the time? And I said, well, that's not what the superintendent said. He said with the existing infrastructure, he wouldn't recommend it, right? Again, school committee could vote differently on that. But I said, with new infrastructure, that is their recommendation, right? Again, subject to the school committee. So I think we just need to make sure that that's clearly articulated. If that's the scenario we're going down, i.e. construct or renovate Neary with a potential closure of Woodward in that scenario to consolidate the grades. I think we just need to be crystal clear with that's the path we're exploring, subject to obviously further votes and analysis. Because I think there's a lot more analysis that needs to be done from a financial perspective, but you can't do that without kind of narrowing your scenarios, or you'll be analyzing this forever. So does anyone have other scenarios that are in their mind that need to be considered at this point?
Nope, I've heard enough. I think you've got two. I think you don't close the school, or you close Woodward and rehab. Well, first of all, you rehab Neary either way, and keep the schools open. Number two is you close Woodward and significantly rehab Neary and probably expand Neary.
Katara?
No, I mean, I think that's sort of been the writing on the wall for a little while now. And I feel comfortable with that as well.
And given that we know on the town side, Jason, that we've got quite a few uses of another building that are pent up, it seems of the two scenarios, closing Woodward seems to be the one that probably has the more likelihood of being the right one.
And I think, I mean, maybe it goes without saying at this point in time, but obviously given the analysis of the space needs and everything, that the closing of Woodward would have to be done in conjunction with the adding of space somewhere else. It can't just happen where we're just, squeezing into the existing buildings.
Well, that's kind of jumping far ahead, but Kateri, I would think that they would absolutely keep Woodward open until Neary was done and then move. It would be pretty hard to close Woodward, squeeze everybody in, and then do the construction. I think practically that would not be a great idea.
Agreed.
So, should we motion? I'm going to put a motion on the floor. We can discuss it. I'm just going to say, for purposes of a recommendation to the Southborough School Committee, that we support the recommendation of the superintendent that there are no consolidation opportunities available with existing infrastructure. However, we would support and recommend further analysis of adding infrastructure at the Neary School with an intent of a potential closure at the Woodward School. So pause and see if there's a second for discussion.
Second.
I'm just going to check in with Greg and see if that sounds good to him. Sounds good to me. Okay.
Greg, have you concluded the same thing that we're talking about here, that it really is, that's our option?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is very helpful to me. I think part of the presentation to the school committee and the work that we were doing was to communicate that we did obviously analyze various scenarios against criteria to come to some recommendations. So this is helpful to me in the sense that I'm not going to update all of the different scenarios. I'm going to update the scenarios that we want to kind of highlight at the next school committee meeting.
The realistic ones, yeah.
The realistic ones, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is good, along with sort of focusing the on the one enrollment projection. It was we're just sort of narrowing down all of the information and possibilities. So it feels like progress.
Sorry, I was playing musical chairs.
Okay, Jason, we made our decision. We made the decision while you were gone.
So no, I heard all of that and agree with that. So I guess let's take a vote on that if there's no more discussion.
I just make one comment.
Go ahead.
That the people who were unclear around the recommendation that was being made, most likely would have had the same feedback around, if we only made one recommendation, why didn't we consider all the other options? So.
Oh, I agree, because I'm going to go there next once we take a vote, Greg, because I still think you need to finalize your report.
In the report we write, we're going to spell this out. We're going to say why Finn, didn't really work. It's a little person school. Chartier, we don't like 5 going to 8. So we'll put all this in. So we'll spell it out, because there are people that wanted us to close Finn too. So it'll all be in the report.
Okay, so let's do roll call vote. Kathy?
Aye.
Katara?
Aye.
and I am aye. So that is unanimous. So I guess, Greg, based on that, I would take the final demographic report and suggest you finalize your color coding, your own space needs study, just so that would be like a supplemental appendix to anything we present. But I think the question now is, like, how do we wrap this subcommittee up, which I think is a presentation to probably not only the school committee, but Katura, I'd see if you or Roger or anyone else have a view of whether this is now rising to like the town level, like we have the select board or advisory in particular join because of the financial ramifications of this. But ultimately, I think, right, the school committee has to make a vote on the direction first, because without that vote, you can't do anything.
I agree. School committee's got to say they're the next critical path here as far as what they want to do, and then the town will do its thing.
Well, there are a couple of things, right? Because there's that, and then also we're pretty close to hearing from MSBA, right? So, I mean, so we have school committee has a meeting in the early second week of December. MSBA, if we hear from them in December, that will happen within a week or two of that. So I don't know that we're ready to make a big presentation in December, but maybe we see if we hear from MSB, we get school committee feedback whenever we're ready to present to school committee. It may be December, Greg, at the next meeting, and then see if we hear from MSBA and then reevaluate in January.
When is your next meeting in January?
It's always the second Wednesday of the month. So whatever that is, let me look.
January 12th.
12th, thank you.
So I've seen Mr. Malinowski go pretty fast when he needs to on things. So what do you think, Jason? You want to be ready on the 15th? You want to wait till January?
I think I do not want to make a presentation before we know the fate of MSBA. However, I could see, but this is not going to be a presentation you whip up overnight. And obviously we need to vote as committee members on the content of the presentation. So what I would like to do is start working on it. And I have a few thoughts of, other than the stuff we've already talked about, of what other data we need to get. And that's going to take time. So I think we're probably looking at January, realistically, as much as I'd like to do it quicker. I mean, it's just that we got a holiday next week.
I know.
So
I was going to see what you were going to say. But,
yeah. But I don't want to. I think we just need to let MSBA finish their process. Now, if MSBA comes and says we're not going to let you know until March, I think we revisit. But I think this committee needs to start working on the presentation. But obviously, we can't work on the presentation unless we do individual components. We're kind of stuck as a small committee of bringing it all together, and would have to meet publicly to do that. So I just want to get that ball rolling, which I think we have already with Greg getting RLS finalized, Greg finalizing his internal space needs, just saying, this is what I tweaked since my last presentation. But I think there's a financial component. And I think that financial component that we need to start to explain is, on the school side, there's going to be a number that this building is going to cost. It's not going to be a small number. It's going to be clearly the largest capital project that the town will have ever taken on. I can say that very clearly. It's going to cost more than that public safety building. I don't know that we're going to know what that number is until we actually have a designer on board and all of that. But what I do think we need to start to think about, and whether these numbers go into a presentation or whether we can just speak to the avenues that we're going to go down, is what is the estimated operational savings that this may generate. It could be zero, because Greg says, yeah, I'm able to better deploy my staff, but I'm kind of the same number of staff. Or, through attrition, we're going to have these sorts of things happening. Or through bus routes, we're going to have one less bus route that costs X amount less. I think anything we can do now to start to think about how that would look, given that you have definitive kind of guidance on in I'll call it collective thinking around how your grade scenarios are going to look, will be helpful, right? Because if you're going to save, I'm just going to use very small numbers, just nuts. If you're going to save $100 a year but the debt is going to cost us $500 a year. We need to present both numbers with gross and net to town meeting. If you're going to save nothing, then it's going to cost us $500 in that example. But then what I feel like I need to do with the capital planning committee is also start presenting a number of, okay, if Woodward was really in play, how much is that going to cost to retrofit? Keith was with me actually when we talked to the designer that's been through the building. It's not going to be a huge number. I don't know what that means, but that was the general reaction was it's not going to be a huge number, but the town needs to inherit Woodward's capital plan in that point, right? So a roof is a roof. It doesn't matter whether it's being used as a school or a school building versus redoing a certain space that may not be used as often or may be used more in a new scenario. Those are the things that I think we need to start thinking about. So I think those will be thoughts that go on a piece of paper in a presentation, but I'm not sure that we're going to have hard numbers to present until you actually have buy-in on a design study.
Yeah, but I agree that I think we can come up with something, a big range of numbers to at least start using as a guide toward this to see how it fits in. But, to talk about, well, the town's got to then consider it's going to inherit the capital plan for Woodward. I mean, this is all one big budget. I mean, call it school, call it town, and it's still the same tax dollars to pay for this. So I wouldn't get too excited about that piece of it. And, we're still going to operate Woodward. So the fact that it won't be in the school budget doesn't really help the taxpayer. It's going to be picked up on one side or the other. I don't know that it's worth a lot of time right now trying to figure out what the school budget might save on this, because I actually don't think it's big. I think it's what you said, might be a few things, might be a little bit of bus savings, might be a little overhead. But unless you think you're going to consolidate or increase class sizes, I don't see where much comes in. And that's what we concluded in 2013. There was very little operational savings when you looked at consolidating schools. So I don't think that's where our focus should be. I think our focus should be on the construction cost of both buildings, as far as rehabbing Woodward to make it useful for the town, and then seeing what it would take to get Neary rebuilt and expanded.
I think Kathy has a point, and unless there are areas where it's going to be massive. Well, I guess that's the bigger town analysis, right? If you don't have to do certain things to a certain building, then you're sort of transferring that over to another place. But it's almost like if you start talking about tiny operational savings compared to a huge.
Yeah, I just want to validate that's the right answer, right? And Greg, I don't expect an answer now, but if you could just give thought to that, unless you already know.
And I think it goes back to our programmatic design and looking at, what it costs to operate the same program across 3 buildings versus 2, increased enrollment in a particular building. So I do think I don't want to commit. I think there potentially are some savings that could be had. But the other thing that I think is important is the net zero, the energy operational costs are very expensive and will only get more expensive as we move forward. And that is something that, again, another factor in this whole equation.
So Greg, I hope you're right. So believe me, I miss penny pincher, right? So I hope we save some money and still get a better quality education for the children, and we save some money. The number we came up with last time was $400,000 a year, but that was closing a school and mothballing it. So you weren't operating that school, so there was no electricity, no cleaning. So we still have to clean both buildings. So that's not going to be a savings to the town. It's going to be a savings to one budget, but it's going to go to the other budget. So you're transferring from the right to the left. So I'm not interested in those transfers from the right to the left. If there is a true savings townwide, that would be great as far as some of these things go.
I think it's the net zero point that Greg made. You didn't have net zero back in whatever year you were doing that, right?
No.
But that we're going to need an engineer that's going to design whatever HVAC system goes into any new build. Like you remember that from the public safety building, that Kathy, that was the worst part of it by far. But we got there. So, okay. So does anyone, I'm happy to do it, but does anyone want to take a stab at just starting to pull the pieces together for a presentation so that we're not like caught flat-footed in a month from now, like when Greg has news one way or another of direction forward?
Before we answer that, I'm not sure why we need to wait for MSBA, because remember at the onset of this committee, we talked about pros and cons of MSBA financing. So I still think we should look at that and make sure that even if we're offered to come in, it really is the right thing to do, that, you know, what we get and the rules we have to abide by and the interest rate and da-da-da still makes it worthwhile. It probably is. I mean, sorry. Probably is, but I don't know why we need to tie that to that decision, because no matter what, we've got to do something in Neary. You know, even if MSBA rejects us, we still got to do something in Neary at some point.
So I was actually going to go there next, but it's a great point, Kathy. My question really is, regardless of the MSBA decision, do we want to spend, and again, I don't want to spend any money if we don't have to, but do we want to spend money getting someone that is an expert in school construction to actually show us, like, if you build an X 1,000 square foot building using what the general construction costs are today, right? Like with some contingencies, this is how much it costs on your own. Then we can do all the bond calculations with Brian and the town finance team. If you were to do MSBA, we know you have roughly a 37% rate reimbursement, but it's only on certain costs. Like, my understanding is, like, OPMs or designers actually out there do this, like, to actually, because we heard right early on in the process, because I do think your point is valid. Is, let's just say Greg gets a great call. Like, now the school committee's got to vote on it. I think the select board has to vote on it as well. But, you know, is that the right decision for the town? So do we want to put something like that in motion now, or do we wait and be ready to do it if we were fortunate enough to get that call? That's, like, I think the question I have, which I think is very similar to what you're saying, Kathy.
Yeah, I'd like to know. Remember, we talked, there was one guy that basically said they went without it and they saved money doing it. There's so much more flexibility if you don't do it. So I think we need to absolutely exhaust that. So I'm happy to take that part of it. If Jason, you want to write the report, I'll take that part of it and do as much research as I can to really see, you know, what pros and cons of MSBA are so we've got it ready and can make our decision when the time comes.
But
I don't know why the board votes on this, Jason. I think it's truly a school committee vote as far as bringing this forward to the town, but I could be wrong.
My only question having to do with that is that is there a certain amount of knowledge that we can glean from the MSBA process that would be helpful in also looking at, you know, so for example, if we get invited to the MSBA process in December and that ball gets rolling, are there certain elements of that we could use to inform, like, sort of an also independent look at what if we did this independently? So we're not, do you see what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes any sense, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can use any designer or architect. I mean, they don't just work solely for MSBA. I think what MSBA provides is a consistent approach to building new schools and some efficiency, because this is what they do. So, but no, that wouldn't preclude us from using some of the experts who've built schools in the Commonwealth through MSBA.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think it is an important question from my perspective is, you know, if through MSBA you're getting the 37% reimbursement, but you're building a $100 school versus, you know, if you went through another process outside of MSBA, you're building a $67 school. Like, that's the question I think that is important to answer.
So, Kathy, I welcome you doing the research, but
I'm interested in this. So I actually would like to do this and really make sure, because I don't understand very much about it. So I'd like to really roll up my sleeves and figure out truly pros and cons of doing this.
But I want to go a step further. I think we need someone that actually does this. If we're going to do it, I think we need to give you access, or the committee access, or Greg access, or Keith access to a third party.
I agree.
That at least can help sanity check the thought process, right? Because it's a Greg's example, right? I don't know if there is an example that you can go from 100 to 67, or maybe that is reality, which may make this decision a heck of a lot easier. Right? So I guess the question is, there's budgets on both sides probably, right? Like schools and the town just approved additional funding at the special to deal with stuff like this if we thought it was in the right interest of the town. I'm not sure it would be high enough to be a public procurement process. I think it's just really like a 1 hour, a couple, not 1 hour, but I think we're talking hours, not weeks and months in a professional report. But I defer to the experts here that deal with public procurement of, do we take this offline and figure out how best to do it if the committee is generally supportive of trying to find an answer here?
I think it's an hours thing too, Jason. I don't think it's very expensive.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to trip procurement.
Okay.
Keith, what's your thought?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think we can, as long as the scope is pretty well defined, I don't think we're going to trip procurement at all.
So I think the question, Greg, naturally comes back to you and Keith of if we were to do something like this, and obviously we need a number, right? But is this something that would fall on the school budget or something you'd be looking for the town to fund through our capital and engineering sort of fund?
I think, obviously it wasn't in our operational budget, to move forward with this type of analysis. So I think it would depend on the scope and the cost, Jason. So
okay.
I'm literally talking about find someone that knows the stuff from A to Z. They will sit down with me for a few hours of consulting time, and that's it. And, we've asked the school budget to absorb quite a few things lately. I would think, Jason, let's just use part of the 30K for this.
Okay. We still have some left from last year too. So that's why I'm.
Yeah. I think if it's
offering
under,
both options.
if it's under $7,500, with a 20-some odd $1 million budget, we can afford that. But if it's above that, then that's where I'd probably come back, with the school committee's blessing to go back to the town and ask for some support in the work.
Okay. So Kathy, let me do some due diligence offline. I'll work with Greg, and then once we have a party to talk to, link you up with them if that works for you.
Works for me.
I'd love to be part of the conversation, but I can't because we trip open meeting law. So
No, we got. You're not careful in Contura. So here's the math for us to leave with today. We're about to pay off the Woodward bond in a year and a half. The delta between the bond payment and the reimbursement state's about $400,000. We're about to also make the last payment on the Algonquin settlement. That's $250. So that's $650 of debt service that we could replace with this. If you just say 50 of that's interest, 60 times 30 is $18 million. We've at least got that, I think, to work with as far as not exciting too many people about what's going to do with their taxes. So we've got some money.
And Kathy, I'll send it to you because I think it'll be useful for advisory, but there's other things dropping off next year. So Brian and I came up with a whole schedule of where capital's it's the perfect time to be having this conversation, but we have to get it all packaged together because the seniors go forward with one thing, the library goes forward with the other, and the schools obviously have to do something. We're going to be in a tough situation as a town. So I'll send you that just so you have it. Couture.
I just picked the things that were directly school related and said we could replace this with school stuff. So
I'm just saying, like, all the fields are paid off. Like, this is a big year,
Wow.
even outside of the schools.
yeah, okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess next steps are we'll find someone to work with Kathy. I'm going to start to create a baseline of a presentation. I'll stay close with Greg just to monitor the MSBA. And Greg, obviously, if you want to talk to Roger offline or show him the video of the meeting, obviously we post on the town website, just kind of get his feelings on when he wants to add us to the agenda. And obviously Katura, weigh in there as you see fit. But I think January sounds like the right answer, unless there's going to be a special meeting later in December, which I just don't think anyone's going to have the appetite for. So, I think the one thing I'll leave the committee with is I think we need to deal with public input on this and figure out how we're going to really get the message out of how important that meeting is going to be, right? Because I think there was some surprise at the lack of attendance at the special meeting, but I candidly don't know that people were following it that closely. So just think we need to get some public input and potentially consider, if we, in our next meeting where we talk about the presentation, whether there's some survey that should go out and what that survey should ask about, right? Is we've heard Greg's views and the school administration's views of consolidation in terms of what it would do from a transition. I think it'd be nice to have a validation of, hey, 95% of the parents also think that's a tremendous idea. I mean, I know I, for one, am not looking forward to the transition already next year, but you know, I think the more hard data we have to show the amount of support, it also will candidly give us insight into where people don't like the answer. We know people aren't going to like the number, right? Let's just put that on the table now. But is there some other reason people don't like this, so that we can try to build support around the collective process?
I don't know about the survey. I don't know if we should do the survey. I think maybe the school committee should do the survey once they're ready.
My question is, yeah. I don't want to do it, but I'm just throwing it out there. I think it's an important part of the process.
That's interesting. Yeah, let's maybe we brainstorm some of the things we might ask on a survey and then see. And I also wouldn't want to do it like prematurely, although I think it's a good point to get feedback to kind of bolster the strategy. So
just saying you gave people an opportunity to provide feedback goes a long way.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I see the school committee saying, look, this subcommittee was formed to let us know whether they believe we could close the school legitimately. They've come back, said, yes, we can. They've recommended that the only permutation is to close Woodward and rehab and expand Neary. So this is where we are. And now we're asking you to weigh in. Yeah,
there you go. Yeah.
I think the challenge is that the story is much larger than just the school. So
it is.
From a citizen's perspective, a parent saying, why would you close Woodward, not knowing?
Absolutely.
And it may be a public forum. Like if the school committee takes the vote, you now have to then, someone's going to have to get up on town meeting floor and make a presentation. Yeah. Or some group.
Yeah, but you got to do it before then. You've got to give a chance to weigh in. But you're right, Greg. It's a two-sided story here. It's not just the schools. It's the fact the town needs space and is going to have to do something about certain departments. We're going to close South Union School. We've got to put those two departments someplace. We need to do something for our seniors. The library is itching to do something. So it's all one big package.
Yeah. Jason, were you saying you were surprised at the low attendance at the special school committee meeting? Yeah. But I wonder if once we start talking about more specifics, people will be more interested. I think, sort of data meetings don't draw the same kind of crowd as decision-making meetings.
No, I completely understood.
Yeah.
Did you look at the YouTube viewership to see if that was bigger?
I don't think the schools were hosting, so I don't think there is YouTube on that one.
It was all Zoom.
It was just, because you have to register on the school platform. Yeah. So, all right. Are there any public comment? All right. Under other business, I'm just going to say, based on this conversation, I am going to submit a request to the select board to extend us to January 31st of 2022. We currently expire on December 31st. I think we all know there's going to be some presentation in January. There may be something before, but there's going to be some presentation in January. So I'll just deal with that administrative hurdle now, unless anyone has an objection.
While you're making a request, do you want to make it a little bit longer so you don't have to do it again?
I do.
Maybe, or you can even do it through March in case the MSBA thing drags out till March, but
even better.
Yeah.
All right. I'm good with that, because then I guess it allows us to meet before a town meeting if we had something there as well. Okay. Yeah. I'll do March 31st then.
Good idea, Katura.
Okay.
All right. Any other business? All right. I'll make a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call vote. Cook.
Aye.
Martin.
Aye.